German climate pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome from my side. My name is Frank Scheidig. I'm working for 20 years for a private sector central bank in Germany who is banking and presenting the third pillar of the German banking system, which is the cooperative banking system. We are around for 165 years and support in particular, besides 30 million customers on the private sector side, the SMEs. The SMEs is the real backbone for those who are not from Germany and have not growing up in Germany. It is Germany's and European success for the past decades. And I'm a very proud European, so not playing too much just the German card. DZ Bank and its partners, the International Chamber of Commerce, we are very happy to support the German government. Jochen Flassbart, you had the pleasure to listen to him before on this Finance Day. That's probably also one of the reasons why a banker is here up on stage and has the honor to open up. But later on, from our federal state, we have the pleasure also to have Sabine Mauderer on the panel. She's Vice President of Deutsche Bundesbank and someone I know for many, many years. And she is really burning to support and to help and greening the financial system, but more to hear on the panel later on from you, Sabine. Then obviously Kalin Anef-Janse, who is from the ESM, the European Stabilism Mechanism. Him and myself and many others are around in Europe for particular since the financial crisis has kicked in, and we have helped around the planet to have the European footprint and to support sustainable finance all over the place. Beside him, my dear friend from the OPEC Fund, who is one of the most important organizations we have in Europe, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. The OPEC surely depends very much on fossil fuel, but I know for sure, and we will hear from him on the panel later on, what they do on the side to compensate for the carbon emissions, and particular also in his member states, what he is going to serve. And there are solutions. The answer is not to forbid, the answer is definitely innovation. And we in Germany know exactly what we're talking about if it comes up to innovation, and we have great ideas. But let me tell you one thing crystal clear. The private sector can donate, but they could never donate so many billions that it has a severe impact to make this society where we live in and our economy really sustainable and carbon neutral. Therefore, we need solutions who are not just bankable, they need to be capital market bankable. And that's why for Europe it is important to have capital market union in place. If this is not going to happen, we can't be as effective as we need to be. And I'm, thank God, not a politician, so I can say that. Yeah, I'm just a private banker who tried to do his best with his colleagues to support that idea. Then finally, I also want to come to KfW. That is our proud promotional bank, which is cooperating with all its subsidiaries among the globe, following the German economy, but even beyond. And they are the closest partner to our government with proudness. And thank you very much, Peter, for coming here and supporting us on the panel too. So I don't want to hold back because Jochen is already ready to talk for his second term here today on stage and kick off the panel. I want to thank you all, and we are around later on. I have probably a minute of closing remarks, but please grab us after this panel is done and let's see that we can act and find solutions where we can talk about what had been achieved in the next 12 months under the presidency of the Azerbaijani government, and it's wonderful climate champion Nigar, who has done with her team a wonderful job here. And I have to say I'm quite impressed by the organizations, and I'm grateful that they receive us very warm here. Thank you very much. Enjoy, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. And now, please, Jochen, come over here, and the term is yours.
So thanks, Frank, for the warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, happy to be here at this side event on sustainable finance and on financing for sustainable development. And of course, it's clear here at the COP we are very much talking about and focused on the climate finance part, but as is said here explicitly, beyond climate finance. And we have all these big numbers here flowing around the 1.2 trillion or 2.4 trillion that needs to be invested in the tracks of climate neutrality until 2030. But looking at the whole picture, I wouldn't say the problem, but at least the challenge is much bigger. And looking back to 2015, we have very much in mind the adoption of the Paris Agreement. But the much bigger thing, saying this as a climate enthusiast, was the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development that was adopted in the same year, a couple of weeks earlier. And I would say even if we were able, and we are able, and I'm sure we will be able, to reach our climate targets, if we would fail on the rest of the SDGs, we would have failed totally. It's not something nice to have, it's about the reality of millions and billions of people. The commitment we gave at that time in 2015 that we will want to organize a decent life for all on Earth, captured in the headline, leaving no one behind. So it goes beyond climate finance. It's about being in the environment bubble, about biodiversity financing. In a couple of weeks, we will have the CCD meeting in Saudi Arabia. So it's about fertile soils, the basis of production and for nutrition and agriculture production, many other ecosystem services. But again, beyond let me say, the green bubble, the environmental bubble, it's about organizing sustainable health system for all, organizing education and reducing inequality. Last year, we had the midterm review of the 2030 agenda, and it became clear, something for which you actually didn't need scientists, but we had scientists. We are behind. We are lacking behind. There are a few areas where we had made progress. For example, child mortality, luckily so. Also, the number of HIV infections went down. But these are already the positive stories to tell. Most of the rest is far behind. And what we said, and rightly said, of course, we got a pushback from the pandemic. Everything went into the wrong direction at that time, and then we had the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and another push back in many areas. For example, very obvious in the field of healthy nutrition. But the full truth is that we were already not on track prior to this crisis. So the good thing is we got the commitment in New York last year at the General Assembly by our leaders that they stay committed to the 2030 agenda and its targets. And I was not so sure about it, because it was the easiest at that time to say, look, guys, we were ambitious in 2015. We saw maybe we were over-ambitious. A lot has happened. So let's be realistic. Luckily, so this was not the statement by our leaders. They were committed, and they asked us to speed up. And that's where we are now. And back to finance. Looking at the whole picture of the SDGs makes it even more obvious. Frank, you were referring to the previous panel, that it would be an illusion that all these problems or challenges can be fixed with budget financing. It's impossible. It's very obvious impossible, and I want to add, even if we were able to finance it with budget money, it would be stupid to do so, because what we need to change is the logic of the markets, to invest in the sustainable portfolios, to invest in the green, in the climate neutral, and the overall sustainable economies. So a lot of money is needed. Budget money is not, by far not, available to the extent to cover this, and that it means we need to focus on how unleashing the investment into the right directions. And there are huge potentials, starting with making it transparent what are sustainable investments and what are unsustainable investments. So here we are talking about the whole range of sustainable investments, sustainable finance and taxonomy. We also need to look at the huge range of potentials to de-risk investments. It's, again, not one size fits all. Let me look at one continent that is the most, or the biggest one in partnering for my ministry. It's Africa. You have a lot of fragility there. Of course, this is not an environment where investors want to go in. So can we identify a region even in fragile states where you have areas for investment, and what are the appropriate measures to de-risk? Then there are other areas where we need to discuss about regulation. I mean, in countries, I don't name a single one, where you have a huge rate of corruption, where you have legal insecurity, you can have as much money and creativity to de-risk, it will not work. So what I want to say, it's not a one-way track. Everybody has to be committed to change something to make investments possible. My last point I want to mention is there is a readiness of many who want to invest into sustainable products, into sustainable development, and here I want to refer to the recently organized Hamburg Sustainability Conference, HSC, in Hamburg. And the whole idea we developed together with UNDP, the Michael Otto Stiftung in Germany, the foundation of Michael Otto, the city of Hamburg, and my ministry, is how to bring positive forces and creative forces together to speed up on the SDG implementation. And one track is the finance track. We announced already there that we want to develop the Hamburg Sustainability Platform as a finance investment platform with the approach basically of standardization. So what I understood, I learned it there, that one obstacle, especially for big investors like insurances, is that some of the sustainable markets are niche markets, not easy to understand. So if you want to get in with big money, it's important that we go for some standardization. That is what we want to do with the Hamburg Sustainability Platform, with a lot of friends around us, and I'm sure at the next HSC in Hamburg in 2025, we are ready for the kickoff. Thanks a lot.
Jochen, thank you very much, and I'm very glad you mentioned HSC. You know that we supported you together also with our friends from the European Commission, as well from the UNFCCC and UNECE, Tatjana Molcean, and we will do so as well in June next year. We can just encourage you to come. The difference, as someone who has attending many COPs and other things, there is less talk, there is more walk. And this is something I know, Joachim, you like to be measured on in your ministry, and you can. And we try to support them with the German Mittelstand, with the European, and also abroad Europe. So please come and join us at the HSC next year in June in Hamburg then. Yeah? It's, by the way, the 2nd and the 3rd of June, and the 4th day we will have the pleasure to support Jochen and the colleagues. Then the panel is ready, so the floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is perceived as one of the key challenges on the global sustainability agenda because it's the most visible and maybe also the most feelable. However, given that sustainability has more than one dimension, it has an economic, an environmental, a social and a governance dimension, there are much more challenges which need to be financed. And I'm now delighted to welcome 4 experts here on the panel. And we want to discuss the global sustainability agenda a little bit beyond the pure climate perspective. Frank already introduced the people, but I would like to introduce them shortly again. To my left is Sabine Mauderer. She's Vice President of Deutsche Bundesbank. And maybe a spoiler, after this event, there will be a great NGFS event here in the Pavilion. So please stay here. And Sabine is also currently chairing the NGFS. So it's a pleasure to have you here. And maybe to get a little bit warm up, my first question to everyone here, and Sabine, how does Bundesbank contribute to the achievement of the SDGs?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a great opportunity. Yes, as you said, I'm chairing the NGFS, and maybe for many of you who have never heard of NGFS, what kind of animal that is. Well, this is an organization out of 140 central banks and supervisory agencies, and it was founded 7 years ago in the aftermath of the Paris Agreement. And the task and the goal of us central bankers and supervisory agencies is to better understand climate but also nature-related risk, to address these risks through this financial sector, and thirdly, of course, also to mitigate these risks. And so while you're asking, so what is my main contribution, or Bundesbank's main contribution? By the way, Bundesbank is the German central bank. Maybe some of you are not familiar with that. Well, I think the biggest contribution central banks can do is to keep prices stable and the financial sector also stable. So why is that? I think price stability means that we keep inflation low. As you've seen, in those countries, and unfortunately there are more and more countries that are facing already climate change, we see droughts, floods, hurricanes. So what do? They disrupt the supply chain. You see significantly increasing food prices, and not just in the global south, but all over the place where we see countries that are facing physical impact and risk materializing. We see rising prices. And maybe just, well, I think you want me to keep short, but I think this is worth just to mention it. What we did at our network and supported by my own central bank is we had a closer look at how does climate change really has an impact on the work of central banks, and it is unfortunately right now it is getting to become more and more a bigger impact. And why is that? I'll just give you one number. Some of you might know that we at the NGFS are doing scenarios, climate scenarios. What kind of scenarios are these? So we are looking at different scenarios, be it the current policies, be it a backlash in policies we might see after the US election or whatsoever, or global backlash. We might see a fragmented world. And what actually do these scenarios mean for the economy? In terms of inflation, in terms of GDP globally, in terms of productivity, unemployment, and so on. So these scenarios, I think we've become a little bit famous for that because many jurisdictions use these scenarios. Many supervisory agencies use that for stress testing, right? But not only, also pension funds use that. And we had a latest update on these scenarios, and I just want to share with you one figure, because I think this is very, well, it tells us where we are. Under the current policies, our analysis shows that we might see a 15% less GDP globally by 2050, just due to climate change. And we have not included sea level rise, tipping points, migration, and so on. Minus 15% GDP globally. Just to give you and I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction. And it's also worth looking at the Bundesbank homepage. There are some very interesting facts on climate change and central banks on it. Coming to Kalin Anefjanzi, he's Chief Financial Officer and member of the Management Board of the European Stability Mechanism, ESM. So Kalin, how does ESM contribute to the SDGs?
Thank you, Marcus. And like Sabina, I'll also do a short introduction. So the ESM is Europe's form of the International Monetary Fund. So we are there to ensure financial stability for the Eurozone. But at the same time, we are supporting countries that have been going through difficulties. So your question, Marcus, was how do we comply with SDGs? In our ESG summary report, we have selected 4 of the SDGs that are closest related to our business model. First is SDG 8, which is work and economic growth. Then SDG 10, which is reduced inequality. Then SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And SDG 17, which are partnerships. Why did we select those? So if you look at the work that the ESM has been doing over the last almost 15 years, is we helped countries in severe stress to become growth champions and economic champions. So countries that went through our support are Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and Cyprus. And if you look at the economic growth, these countries now are outperforming even the north of Europe. Some of those economies, like the Spanish economy, is one of the strongest. Now, that is the economic side of the story, but there is, of course, also a climate part of the story. So a year ago, with our team, we were in Cyprus, which is one of the member states that we supported. And when we visited Cyprus, they expressed, as a country, a great concern how climate change will impact their economy. So for Cyprus, to put it in perspective, between 15 to 20% of their economy is tourism-oriented. Now, the majority of that tourists used to come in July and August when most of the Europeans had holidays. Now, lately, more and more, the summers are above 40 degrees. So almost unbearable to be outside and you live in air-conditioned spaces. So they had to really change their country's strategy to become a year-round tourist destination, skip July and August, and focus on tourism across the year, and also, for example, make it attractive for digital nomads. So you see how climate actually is impacting not only businesses, not only local communities, but entire countries. So we as ESM are taking these climate risks into account. We are also members of NGFS, or observers, to say the right word. So we also work together with Sabino and Nicola, our Secretary General, who is also in the audience, is working very closely with Sabino on these topics. Now, I want to also make one final point. As the CFO of the institution, ESG is very close to my heart. And what I said beginning of this year in Davos, where I chaired the CFO community of everyone in the World Economic Forum, every CFO, every finance person has to become a sustainability leader. We cannot put it to CSOs or to corporate sustainability practices, but CFOs, CEOs need to push that forward. So every CFO should be a sustainability leader. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kalin. Coming to my right, Tarek Shailala. He's Assistant Director General, Financial Operations of the OPEC Fund for International Development Fund. So how is the OPEC Fund contributing to the SDGs?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank Frank and team for the invitation. Much appreciated. Perhaps just a quick introduction. The OPEC Fund is a multilateral development bank that was founded by then members of OPEC with a specific and unique mandate, which is development financing. So our core activity is like other MDB. We have a complete separate mandate than OPEC, which is obviously the secretariat for OPEC member countries. So the OPEC fund has been around for almost 50 years. Actually, we'll celebrate our 50th anniversary in 2026. We are a global MDB, and we focus across a few key sectors that touch almost all the SDGs. Of course, like a typical MDB, we focus a lot on infrastructure, education, and enhancement of skill sets, but as well as, of course, now there's a clear focus on climate. And from our perspective, I think that Frank and the team put it nicely earlier. We, of course, have a great focus on climate for absolutely the right reasons, and we are razor focus on that, and we have a climate action plan. But MDBs are about making sure that the economies of development countries are sustainable. And therefore, that's the key that we follow. The SDGs are designed to be essentially interdependent. And at the same time, we need to be careful that sometimes we address a couple of SDGs that we also keep in mind what the potential impact on others. So addressing poverty, hunger is critical, but also we may make sure that any consequences that on environment, specifically agriculture, that things are dealt with. So it's not only holistic, it's there's connectivity between all. We, until about 2 years ago, we were fully equity funded, but now we're rated and also we're in the market, so we're leveraging our balance sheet, and we will continue to invest and assist member countries, partner countries in their journey in trying to create sustainable economy specifically on climate mitigation adaptation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, we have Peter Hilleges. He's Chief Sustainability Officer of KfW. And yeah, how does KfW contribute to the SDGs?
Thank you, Marcus. Just to correct you, Chief Climate Officer. So I'm talking a lot about climate finance, but today a little broader about sustainable finance. So, but it's of course, I mean, one is part of the other. As you know, maybe KfW is a German development bank with a mandate within Germany. So about 2/3, 60% of the lending goes into Germany, and the other third goes internationally, where there's commercial finance for export and projects, there's private sector finance from DEG, which is a subsidiary, and then there's the development finance, which goes to the non-Annex 1 countries, I must say, here in the COP context, in which part I'm working as a Chief Climate Officer. So, of course, sustainable finance, I would say it's mainstream. Yeah, so if we talk about different parts or sorts of financing, I would say sustainable finance is mainstream. We have a SDG mapping tool in KfW, and the 80 billion per year that KfW is giving out as loans and grants, every single euro is accounted against one or more SDGs. So in a way, it helps us monitoring what we're doing, but it doesn't really help us to direct funding, because we're simply mapping the money. Yeah, so there's no ambition in that system. So that's one thing. Second thing, climate finance is SDG 13, of course, and then mapping against some other SDGs like energy or water or partnerships. Climate finance has an ambition because we have the Paris Agreement. Yeah, and so the Paris Agreement tells us, okay, you have to achieve this and this and this objective. So that helps us directing funding to a sustainable goal, a sustainability goal, which is climate, either mitigation or adaptation. Then we talk about biodiversity finance these days. That is far away from being mainstream. So ESM or Deutsche Bundesbank probably looking at this topic as well. We do as KfW. So after mainstreaming climate into our lending, we're now trying to figure out how to mainstream biodiversity into our lending and grant financing. Last topic, just transition. I mean, we all know there's a social dimension to many of the SDGs, and we know that transition requires us to look at the social stability of each society and economy. So just transition would, for me, be the fourth topic we have to look at when we talk about mainstreaming financing.
Okay, thank you very much. So during the introduction round, we already touched upon the different dimensions of sustainability, and I would like to start with the economic one. So, Sabine, the NGFS has currently published a report illustrating how both the physical and transition effects of climate change can have macroeconomic impacts over time, horizons relevant for monetary policy. Could you highlight a few key findings, please?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, we published quite a lot of reports recently, so it's worth reading all of them, of course. But let me just highlight a few, the essence out of those ones. So what we've, I just mentioned this minus 15% GDP loss globally. Some of you might ask, well, this is just, I've never heard of such a number. And even us, we were also surprised. And the reason why we now see all of a sudden such an increase in damage or in losses is because in the previous vintages of our scenarios, we completely underestimated the physical risk. And I think this is something where we really have to bear in mind, well, it's not only about climate policy that would bring, a lot of dynamics into the economics, meaning, I have to transform your economy. But I think physical risks are, more and more materializing. And that's a global phenomenon. When we started our network 7 years ago, we focused on transitional risk because most of us were from the developed countries, right? And we thought this is our major threat. Unfortunately, over the last years, we see that it doesn't matter where you are, whether global south or global north. All of us are affected by physical risk, meaning droughts, floods, hurricanes, and much more. I cannot name all of them. And that means that including into our scenarios and everything we do, physical risk, all those weather events I just mentioned, has made a big change in the numbers. And what I think is really important to do now is to take this macroeconomic view and to think of what does that actually mean for each industry? What does that mean for each single company? Of course, DZ Bank is financial industry, but it's not just about the financial industry. No, I would even say it's even more the real economy we have to address. And that's something where I think we should have a closer look at.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. So sustainability risks are financial risks, and this is why we also should talk about, from my point of view, of extra financial factors instead of non-financial factors, so to say. But now let's move a little bit also to the social dimension of sustainability, and maybe Peter, how important is it, particularly in developing countries, that climate protection measures are accompanied by social programs?
Yeah, since I already mentioned just transition, I mean, it's obvious. Huh? So what we need to achieve, we all know that, is a new socially, economically, and also carbon-wise balanced economy in each and every country. And this is a process which comes with a lot of pain and burden. Not only on the input side, we need a lot of money, but on the impact side, we need to make sure that people don't lose out because of that transition. And we know, of course, in Germany we have had that discussion quite substantially. We still have it, and we have it in all our partner countries. So I'm talking about my partner countries, developing countries, where, of course, the impact is much more severe because people are already under, say, stress and in difficult living circumstances. And then you take away their livelihood because you want to decarbonize, and that's, of course, not acceptable. So just transition has to go with our decarbonization strategies. And so what we try to do is, when we go to countries like South Africa, for example, or Indonesia is another one of those just transition countries we are partnering with, is we try to not only invest in the decarbonization, but also in social security schemes, skill development, and economic development through mostly SMEs, so small and medium enterprises. Create alternative livelihoods that people can use when they lose their current livelihood. So that's really essential, because only building PV plants is not going to help us transition.
Okay, thank you. Staying at the social dimension, Colin, the ESM contribution to financial stability is a social mission, so to say. So hence you have adopted a very holistic approach when it comes to funding decisions, for example. Could you explain this a little bit more in detail? And yeah, could you also elaborate a little bit about how ESG considerations are built into your investment decisions?
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, 7 years ago, we started our really deep ESG journey, and we decided to take a holistic or full balance sheet approach. So if you want to do ESG or sustainability, you don't look at part of your business, but the entire business. So as it is the Finance Day, we can get a little bit more technical. We are a financial institution like KfW and OPEC funds. We have assets and liabilities. So if you look at our asset side, we have 400 billion euros, of which 300 are to loans to countries and 100 billion are invested in bonds. So we are rating every single asset based on their ESG rating. For that, we use Moody's VGO, which is one of the rating agencies, and they give scores from 0 to 100. So what we can say is that our loans have an average of 72, which is in the advanced category of Moody's as an ESG rating. Our investments are higher, of around 75, so that's where we invest, for example, in KfW bonds or in the German bonds. Now, if you take that in total, our score for our whole asset side is 73. Now, with Frank, we spent a lot of time on roadshows globally and selling Europe. And what often investors ask is, are you green? How green are you? This gives us a very objective way to say we don't only issue social green bonds what others do, but the entire institution has one of the strongest ESG ratings. And maybe because we're in the German Pavilion, Germany is our largest shareholder. So also for the German taxpayer, it means that we are actually investing very good the money that goes into us. Now, the last point on what you mentioned, which I think is very relevant, if you look at it from a global perspective, the currency of choice for ESG finance is euro. More than 50% of all the bonds, green bonds issued are euro denominated. So when Chile goes to market, they issue in euro for the green bonds. When Indonesia goes to market, they choose the euro as a currency. When Capo Verde goes to the market, they choose the euro. Because Europe has the strongest structure with the ESG taxonomy, etc., and also the deepest pockets. So the euro is really the currency of choice for ESG.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. There was a buzzword already mentioned a little bit earlier, transition. And this not only from an environmental perspective. So Peter, Tarek, sorry. Why is the energy transition a must and not an option? And why is the social dimension also very important to this?
No, thank you very much for that question, and I think it's a very important point to talk about. I mean, if you just think about the term just transition, it shows just two things. It shows us that we have to transition away to a more sustainable, renewable sources of energy, but also it suggests that there is a pace to it, that the process has to be thoughtful and has to be quite inclusive. I think it's an excellent point that you brought up. We need to keep in mind that the least developed countries are the most exposed to this. So that suggests 2 points. First of all, we need to make sure that they're kept in the process, and also obviously their specific needs are there. But also for them, and for any country, as I think you both mentioned, is solving the climate issue. Not only it addresses climate and we're concerned about, but unless you do it, it will have a huge economic impact. We're talking about farmers and others that are suffering from that. So I think from their perspective, it has the two sides to it, i.e. they have to slowly move to more sustainable and renewable, but also as they're the most impacted, they're probably the biggest beneficiary of it. And then perhaps a point on the sustainable or maybe the renewable sources of energy. I mean, another advantage of this is, by definition, most of these sources, not all of them, are local. So if you're able to, in a country, have a hydro or other renewable sources, these also insulate the government, the population, from potential volatility in other sources of energy that they now currently have. So I think from a sort of inclusivity, but also as well as the economic argument, the transition needs to happen, but it needs to happen in a very thoughtful way. Thank you.
Okay, so you can more or less say the discussion on capital markets also has matured. It's not about talking green only, so to say. So, Colin, Within this whole transition story, where do you see the biggest challenges to shift economic activities to a more, let's say, green approach, from dark to brown, so to say, from brown to green, so to say, but yeah, which are also the greatest opportunities? Because this is very important from my point of view. We are always talking about challenges, but we should translate challenges into opportunities at the end of the day.
Absolutely, Marcus. Well, Frank referred to the Capital Markets Union and the importance of European competitiveness. Yesterday, Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece, the country that we have lent most money to, spoke about the Draghi report. And I think if you look at the next 5 years, for Europe, it is really to see how we can deliver on that Draghi report. And the first reaction to it was it's a lot of money, the 800 billion that need to be invested in the economy and also in the green economy to make that transition and the transition finance. Last week he came back with a Financial Times op-ed where he broke that down by saying 20% of this is only public money, 80% should come from the private sector. So you leverage quite largely the public sector money to the private sector. Then still some people said it's a lot of money because over 5 years that is almost $1 trillion. My response to that is that money is already there on the public side. So and the story that links to that is if you combine the lending capacity of the ESM, the European Investment Bank, in the EU, we have issued just $1 trillion at the moment. That is 40% of the available capacity. If we would fully use our lending capacity, and we have 400 billion available, you actually can reach that Draghi target quite easily. So what is, for me, not the problem is the public money. It is trying to get the private sector on board to push that forward and trying to find the right project for it. But I think we can be ambitious as Europeans.
So to summarize, we can say we have the money, we have the right financial instruments, but we have to allocate the money via the right financial instruments to the right projects, so to say, to projects with positive impact, right?
Maybe one can have a slightly different view, but of course, you're absolutely right that we have exit liquidity, so money is around. The question is just where does the money go to, right? I think I would put that way. And public money, so if you not just look at of Europe, but have a look globally, and what, I don't need to repeat all the numbers that is need for not only climate, nature, and for all the SDGs, right? That, the numbers are competing with each other. So I think that only a fraction of it will come from the public sector, because look at our world where we are today. We have so many threats and so many things going on. People or countries will increase their spending on military service, unfortunately. People will spend a lot of money on health, this is SDGs, but you have so many competing challenges that public money is, I think we will see globally, right, a scarcity on public money. So, and to this end, I think it's so important, and you're absolutely right, we have to get the private sector on board. This is, I think, the biggest challenge we have to do. And being at the COP, I think it's very important that we always manage, because we are dominated here by the public sector, we have to really get into the shoes of the private sector, because they are the key drivers. If they don't change, we will not manage. And therefore, I really encourage also, also the future COPs, and whatever we do is get the private sector, get the corporates, not just the financial institutions, involved and asking how can we manage together. And maybe one last point is, and this is what I frequently mention, is it's not just them telling what to do. It's about, because this will not work. We really have to see what is in for a corporate. Why should I as a corporate become sustainable? What is in for me? And there are two things I think from a corporate perspective really matter. It's first to incorporate SDGs into your risk management? So what does it actually cost? Well, how high is my risk if I do neglect the risk of nature, climate, health, and so on, right? And the costs are tremendous, right? The second point is how can I encourage corporates to be sustainable is if that's part of your strategy, if you think that sustainability is really worth it because it adds on to your business model, you might become a first mover in your industry in being, deliver clean technology or anything else. So it has to be beneficial for the corporate sector. And I think this is what also the private sector regulators all have to understand. And maybe a last word, because of course we praise Europe. We've done, I think, a great job. At the same time, we see also looking ahead and looking back both ways to say we need to accelerate the process. We need to set a clear message towards the private sector, but this must be with a framework that does not overburden the private sector. We need them. They need to fulfill, what we ask them to do. We need to be very clear in our messages, but at the same time, we may have to make sure that they can deliver what we ask them for. Thank you.
So operability is a very important and utilization, so more or less. Any more comments on this topic?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to my client countries, so the private sector in our countries. So say in sub-Saharan Africa, in emerging economies like Brazil, like Indonesia, what we are trying to do as KfW Development Bank is actually mobilize them to do these kind of things, to invest, to run these business models that might be feasible, that might be attractive to them under different circumstances. Yeah, whereas we in Europe have all these regulations and definitions and standards, we have an EU taxonomy and other things. In many of our partner countries, you don't have this. So how do you get these people? There's a lot of capital around in these countries. Yeah, it just goes other places. Yeah, and they have a shorter time frame for investment. So if they invest in the PV plant, they want to pay back in 5 years, yeah, not in 15. So they have a different rationale, and we need to support them to actually do, say, climate-friendly investments within their own business circumstances, and important, in their own currency. Yeah, because traditionally banks like KfW and others, MDBs, bilateral banks, have been lending in hard currency. Yeah, US dollar, euro, yen, Swiss francs. But this is a burden to our partner countries. Yeah, so what we need to shift our model to is enabling our partners in our country, partner countries, to lend and pay back in their own currency, which will be a cost to us, which will be a cost to, where's Mr. Flassbart, the German budget. But I think it's the right way to go. And that's what I wanted to say about private sector, additionally to our European private sector.
Thanks a lot. I think Sabina did an excellent job covering why would the private sector be interested from their own perspective, which is a very good point. The other thing is if you want the private sector or private investors, private capital to get engaged, of course, there's a lot of talk about how MDBs can leverage that through de-risking and blend financing. I think that's covered widely. But it's also important to keep in mind a couple of things that incentives are needed, including, for example, some of the incentives that are producing maybe potentially not the right outcome in terms of subsidies. If some of these subsidies are repurposed for other causes, that will solve one. The other key point is the regulatory and legal environment in these countries. At the end of the day, the investors need to be assured that they can invest and their capital is protected. So I think some of the work that some of the MDBs are doing, including ourselves, to help countries modernize, enhance their policies, would also go a long way to attract investment from the private sector. Thank you.
Okay, before we move to other interesting topics like biodiversity, so going beyond a little bit the climate perspective, are there any questions from the audience already? There's one in the back.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Fatna Ikram from Morocco. So basically, you mentioned like how Germany actually supported, like given like a specific financial support and doing partnerships. So my question is, how does actually Germany utilize the financial resources and sustainable finance strategies, and also the international corporations to support the global south, which are like the most impacted and vulnerable countries, like in adapting to climate change, and also what specific initiatives and partnerships are in place to ensure that these vulnerable countries have the necessary resources actually to adapt to the climate change impacts. Thank you.
That's maybe a good question for Peter, and maybe I can add one thing. Also, with a look at the new geopolitical situation in the world, why are multilateral cooperation more important than ever?
Okay, that's quite a bunch of questions. Maybe Mr. Flassbart should answer the question about German development cooperation because he's kind of deciding about the strategy. But I can say for KfW Development Bank, if you look at vulnerability and adaptation, we finance about 6 to 7 billion of climate finance every year as KfW Development Bank, out of which about 2 billion goes to adaptation. The rest is mitigation. Why is that skewed? Because in adaptation, we need a lot of grant money. Yeah? So there is, say, the public funds that you need. There's less absorptive capacity for private money in adaptation. And so that's really one of the big challenges. What I'm hoping for is actually something happening here at the COP. That's the global goal on adaptation. Yeah, so there is this working group, this negotiation happening, and if they come up with metrics for adaptation, which we can actually use in order to direct our funding, like we can with the 1.5 degrees or with a net zero target. We don't have these targets for adaptation. If we are able to get something like that for adaptation, it's going to help us a lot in directing money better towards adaptation. But it's really a big challenge, I give you that. And then most of the vulnerable countries have less debt capacity, which again requires us to provide more public funding. So I'm handing your question again to Mr. Flassbart and maybe our Ministry of Finance in Germany. On partnerships, I would actually see them independently of the current political situation. Let it be Germany, US, or any other country, France. You mentioned many countries, I guess. I think partnerships are essential because the task is so big. And we need to make sure that if we work in a country, say like Indonesia, we are working in the same direction as others who are working in the country. So say Asian Development Bank, World Bank, JICA, French AFD, so just to name a few. And so that's a partnership which in ideal cases should be led by the host country. So for Indonesia, for example, I can say they are leading. Yeah, so they're taking their own destiny in their hands and they're saying, okay, this is our way to go. This is how we want to develop, decarbonize, adapt, and now help us doing it. And that's a real partnership. And I think that's really the way to go. Unfortunately, this only works so far in, say, more stronger governance countries where the governments are ready to take the initiative and they have the resources, the people, to do it. So for other countries like fragile states, vulnerable states, this is really continues to be a big challenge.
Okay, Sabine, you have something to add?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for this really valuable question. So I think, we just heard how Germany can contribute also to adaptation and to, support also the Global South. And I think we heard quite rightly that Germany is really committed to supporting, as it did in the past, the Global South. So maybe I just want to add to this that more from a broader perspective, and I just said that not just the Deputy Governor of the German Central Bank, also leading the network of central banks. So we just started to set up a task force on adaptation finance with all central banks globally. And then the reason why we did this is because we get more and more involved, also the central banks from the global south. And they taught us to say, well, listen, it's not just about your mitigation and money spending on transformation. We actually are facing climate change today, and we need money financing the adaptation, because for us that's already real today. And what we found out is that, you know, mostly adaptation relies in the hands of the public sector. And as I just alluded to, the financing situation of the public sector, there is not enough money coming or can be contributed from the public sector alone. This will not be sufficient. So what we do at the NGFS as a task force, we are, you know, we just started now, and we hope to see a report by to the Brazilian COP next year. And we will, you know, have a look at, is it really attractive, or can it be a business model also for a business chance for the private sector to invest in adaptation, right? Be it crops or whatsoever, or, you know, even for infrastructure, I don't know. I just don't know. We have to find out. Second thing is, what about insurance gaps? I know insurance is not quite far, you know, covered, especially in the global south, but even the global north, we see big insurance gaps, right? And the third thing is, I think we really have to deal, it's a trade-off between every dollar that goes into adaptation is lacking for transformation or mitigation the risk, right? So I think these two financial goals are competing with each other, right? And so I think we have to find a smart and brave way to deal with that. But be assured, so we're very much aware of your situation. And I just encourage us, the Global South, please be active, raise your voice, especially in these political times, because what you are facing now, we will face in the global north very soon. And the louder or the more we hear your voice, the more aware we are what we will see in a couple of years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is another question or comment.
Yeah, thank you. Adel Beltagi, I'm the former chair of the Global Forum for Agriculture Research, former Minister of Agriculture in Egypt. Colleagues, we talked about, this is very interesting that initiatives coming from Europe and from Germany in relation to the SDGs. But the point here that we have on the agenda, we have the loss and damage aspiration. We are talking about $1 trillion is not enough. We want more than that. If we make the calculation, it goes beyond. But a mixture between private and public and international banks, World Bank and the regional banks, and maybe with the private sector we can meet some of this. But what's not clear is the link between these funds and the adaptation fund and the loss and damage fund. How this is going to interplay in seeing something on the ground which is good for people. Adaptation means local people and in the regions, especially in the global south. How we can see this materialize, and the entities and institutions who are going to operate the system. Then we go to a business plan, we see a lot of gaps, not connecting all this together. If you just give us in a glance your opinion on this, because this is how it will be operational. Otherwise, we are talking, I attended in Abu Dhabi, I attended Cairo, I attended Cancun, and we are saying a lot of aspiration. The translation element is not very well there. Thank you.
If you want, I can start, and then I'm sure colleagues on my panel have big contributions to that. So first of all, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely right. There is clearly, we have to think of, and that's what I understand from your question or remark, is the linkage between public, public-private transformation, adaptation. So we have to make a holistic story out of it, right? That's what your point, right? And yeah, well addressed, well understood, difficult to solve. but let me try to give some answer and some hope also in this regard. So at the network that I'm chairing, the NGFS, we address this tool that is not new, but I think has really great potential, that is blended finance, right? So you are familiar with this tool. It has been, well, not so successful than we would have hoped in the past, but I think it has great potential. So for all of you that are not familiar with blended finance, that means that we have limited public money available, and we need to, or we use a limited amount of public money in order to trigger much more private money. So to be a little bit more precise, you have a project maybe in the Global South or in one of the EMDE's countries, and you need private money, but the investors shy away because for multiple reasons you all know. So the idea of blended finance is then to spend some of the public, take some of the public money, like in forms of guarantees, in form of concessional loans or grants or whatsoever, or even equity, right? And in order to, and you do this, and by doing this, you take out some of the risks that the private sector does not want to take, right? We cannot cover all of the risks, but at least you take one. So the idea behind is then to really trigger a lot of private money. And I think it is quite, if you listen to this tool, it sounds like, wow, this is a solution for all. So now you wonder, why does this not work? Because as KfW and all the others can mention, this is a tool that has been around for more than 20 years, and still it's not the only, it does not work to the extent we would love to see that. So at the NGFS, we did a survey and a research of what are the main obstacles in blended finance. And I just would like to mention a few of them, not to overburden this discussion, but maybe some. So the biggest point is, first of all, uncertainties in, if a investor from the developer or from the Global North wants to invest into an interesting project of the Global South, first thing to reduce is uncertainties. Legal uncertainties, also political uncertainties, because these are major risks they are fearing. So we have to, to deal with that. The second biggest obstacle is, I think, the size of the tickets. Investors want to think big. Many projects are too small. So what we need to do is either to pool projects or to scale up these, and I think KfW and others can, or the fund can even, allude to that. The third thing is, it is very difficult for a regulated financial institutions to invest in projects in the Global South, because the capital requirements are pretty high for doing so. So, to put it in a nutshell, so far, blended finance has so many obstacles, because in the end, for an investor, private investor, it has to be a business case. It has to be a business case where the risk-return profile is attractive. And so far, it's not. And that's, I think, the thing we have to deal with. I hope this helps.
Thank you. Any comments on this?
Now it works. I picked up the word loss and damage from your comment and question, and of course that's a very essential third leg of climate finance that we're talking about today, and the least defined one. Yeah, and I understand very much that countries like Egypt and other countries who are exposed to climate risks quite strongly are looking at, say, advance in the discussions about loss and damage, about making it operational. So we are having discussions here at the COP about the fund that should contribute to loss and damage funding, and we would agree. We believe it has to be established as the third pillar. Right now, what's happening, and Sabine was mentioning insurance gaps, there is already some work going on, and there's a program called Insure Resilience. Carsten Löffler is here from the Frankfurt School, who's been doing a lot of work on that. So there's an Insure Resilience program that provides insurance solutions on the micro level or on the macro level for certain climate risks. So that's something which is very abstract to anyone who is not part of the industry. It's really difficult, and if you go to a country or a farmer or a person with a house on the shore of a river, it's hard to sell an insurance. So, like you were saying, we need a good story. It needs to be palpable for people. I think we have a job to do there.
Alan?
Yes, a few reflections from my side, and basically building on the two previous speakers. So I was last year at Climate Week, and the explanation was there were so many demands on where money has to go to, and the question was we don't have money. Then a few weeks later, I was at the IMF World Bank meeting. There is so much money available, we don't know where to invest it. So it seems that there is a little bit of a mismatch, and that leads a little bit to your question. Now, I do think that the multilateral development banks have started with some interesting products like the biodiversity bonds, the rhino bonds, the blue bonds, the debt for nature swaps. On some of these products, we ourselves are investing in those because we think that they are, as Sabine said, they give you a good risk return. They're well protected, but at the same time, they give you a good investment. Now, that is partially the answer. The other more difficult question is the climate risk aspect, which Sabine mentioned, but you also mentioned, and the underinsured part. So our economists at the ESM, they looked at Europe on how much is underinsured. So what is currently insured by insurers and then reinsurers is around 1/3 of the risks. 2/3 are completely not insured. Now, what happened 2 weeks ago in Spain, there was a huge flooding with rain, which was a 15 billion ticket up to today. But actually today there was supposed to be some sport games, and there are again rains in the south of Spain, which had to be postponed. We had a few years ago in Germany, my own country, Netherlands, also large floods, which at the end was a ticket that insurers couldn't pick up and the governments had to pick up. So I think what we are currently underestimating is how much this uninsured climate risk is. And my final point on this, 2-3 weeks ago at the IMF meetings, I had on a panel a gentleman from Jamaica. He said, if you live in the Caribbean, every other year you're hit by huge hurricanes. And these are costs that none of us can bear. Some countries, like Sint Maarten, has the privilege of having France and the Netherlands to support them. Other countries don't have that. Cat bonds or catastrophe bonds are not really helping because they're not big enough. The numbers are not scaling up, as Sabine mentioned. So I think you really put your finger on a very painful point that we all need to work on. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Thank you, Colin. So speed was also mentioned here, and speeding up. So we've heard the SDG agenda is seriously behind. So Tarek, how can we really speed up?
Thanks a lot. I think we alluded to it in some of the answers that we had, but I think the couple of things. In order for us to achieve the SDGs, I think it's very clear the private sector has to be brought in. And Sabine talked about the blend finance and de-risking and insurance, etc. That's very critical. That it has to be inclusive, as we mentioned before. Without that, I think we will fail, but also, as I suggested earlier, there is interconnectivity. So you cannot address one SDG without making, paying attention to the other one. And as I said earlier, especially in the less or least developed countries, there are a number of subsidies that unfortunately are encouraging the status quo. And now, last thing you want to do is to take a subsidy away from, and then the government will never give it back. But you perhaps can repurpose that to encourage the renewables, encourage spending that money in addressing things like displaced people, education, etc. And I think these things have put in place, in addition to what you mentioned earlier in terms of regulatory environment, a more hospitable environment for investors, that will all, in my mind, facilitate quicker success through SDGs. Thank you.
let's touch upon now on a very important topic in the environmental dimension of sustainability, nature-related topics and especially biodiversity. So Sabine, why is this important for central banks to also consider natural risks and biodiversity risks?
So if you would ask the majority of central banks, I'm not sure whether all of them would agree that this is something central banks have to deal with. But this is the same situation we faced 7 years ago when we said that climate most probably will matter for climate central banks. So I think we need to raise the awareness. And how do you raise awareness? By putting numbers on things that also economically nature matters. And this is what we are currently doing. I must admit that it is extremely difficult to raise the interest towards nature because most think that climate is already too much. Right? All the capacities you put into a climate, there's already too much. So now in addition to that, and most see that this is an add-on climate, so this is, I think, a real challenge. So what we try to do at the NGFS is to once again put a number on the ecosystem, so especially on the services, on the nature services. So how much is it worth that we have no scarcity of water? How much is the bee worth, right? How much are insects in general worth? The plants. How much does the pharmaceutical industry depends on plants and insects? And this is a really high number. I just forgot the precise number, but there are researchers showing that the pharmaceuticals that went through the FDAC in the United States is quite high. So a big percentage of really important pharmaceuticals like vaccinations and others are depending on plants and insects. So I think what we need to do is to show people and corporates that nature is the precondition for business and for our species, right?
Okay. You want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to subscribe to what Sabine was saying from personal experience. And at KfW, we've started, we call it a transform program. Started in 2018, building the scope and stuff like that. So we are 6 years down the line, and we've managed with tremendous input from many people and advisors and IT solutions to actually get climate and ESG into our systems to some extent. So climate physical risk, transitory risk, and ESG. There's a lot of regulation in Europe, which we are also fulfilling with those things. And now we have initiated the process for biodiversity. And I would again concur with Sabine saying this is even more complicated. Yeah, I remember there was a study of the economics of ecosystem services and biodiversity, maybe, when was that, 15 years ago? Very important, by a former Deutsche Bank manager who ran this as a separate activity, and now it's doing it full time. That tried to monetize all sorts of ecosystem services. So we can have prices, yeah, but they are differing. It's not like with carbon where we're saying, okay, we know there is a damage cost of 1 ton of carbon, which is $350 in 2030 or whatever. We don't have that for biodiversity. So that's a big uphill task, but I think it's worth it. Yeah, if you look at the financing industry, you can work with something when it has a price, when you have it into your balance sheet, into your annual profit and loss account, and then it makes a difference to the financial sector, and that we need to achieve it.
So maybe just to add this, because I found this is a good point. So I think that the biggest challenge with nature is that in comparison to climate, you have one trigger, that's emission. And when you talk about nature, you talk about soil, water, air, plants, insect, and you can, go on Atlantic Ocean, whatsoever. All those services do have different triggers. So it's not just like, in principle, climate would be easy. We just have to reduce the emissions, right? And you see, we even struggle to do that. So when you talk about nature, is a completely different story. First of all, sometimes we even do not know what does it need to preserve this ecosystem, and sometimes we know, but it's so diverse and difficult to have a grip on, or to even find a framework where to preserve that. So I think this is just I think the real threat for not covering nature risk.
Okay, thank you. Before I hand over to Frank for the final words, so one last statement from every one of you. So what are your expectations of the outcome of this year's COP? So maybe we start with Colin.
I went the last 2 days also to some of the speakers of the prime ministers, and there's one that I think touched me most, which was Giorgia Meloni from Italy. She gave a very good speech, but then at the end she said, I don't stand here only as a prime minister of Italy. I stand here also as a mother, as a kid. I hope when the moment my daughter will be in your seats, she will see a better future. And I have 4 little children. It touched me very much, and I hope all of us can take that with us and know what we are doing this for, that we should really make progress. We cannot stop, we should really push forward.
Okay, thank you. Sabine.
Well, what do I wish, what is the COP for? I think when the overall goal of this COP is to not lose hope due to, and one could lose hope when you see the geopolitical situation. And for me personally, it even encouraged me to do more. And what I would wish is that everybody, everybody who's here has a special reason. And that's because he's interested in climate and in SDGs. And so, so my hope is that we even get, more power onto, making it.
Okay, great. Tarek.
Thank you very much. I think one clear one is hopefully there is more progress in the loss and damage discussion that we talked about earlier. And maybe the second one, we talked a lot about adaptation and a challenge in that one. There was a framework that was agreed last year in Dubai, the Global Climate Resilience Framework, which, among other things, it runs across 7 sectorial targets, and to help implement, and it will also guide the implementation and funding for adaptation. I hope and expect that something comes out of this COP. I think at the end of the day, climate is development. I mean, we know that, and you said it very nicely. Nature is essentially a prerequisite for business. So that's the goal. That I think hopefully out of this COP, that all are aligned. Businesses and others, they understand that without addressing the issues at COP, economic growth or activity is at high risk. Thank you.
Last but not least, Peter.
I think what I'm hoping for is rather of political nature than a specific activity. It's what I've been recognizing over the past couple of COPs was that countries are emancipating themselves more and more. We are losing maybe the clear dichotomy between developed and developing countries in this world, and I think that's a good trend. I think all of us have to accept and learn about, we are a common world with different perspectives, with different economies and different expectations, and that is okay. We don't need to convince each and everyone that they are on the wrong side of the river and they have to come to our side. I think it's more important that we understand we both live along the same river and make it our joint river and I think it's a long process, obviously, because it means that you have to give up on some of your cliches. There's discussion about post-colonialism. There's a discussion about fossil fuel countries who are just wanting the bad for the world. No, it's not true. And I think make a next step in this, and I think that's going to bring us forward towards COP30 and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. So I hand over to Frank for the final words.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much to the audience. It was a long one. And in particular, thank you to the panelists. I think we raised topics of importance, and I thank you, sir, in particular, for your very valid question. I want to comment on that as well, because what do we need to provoke private sector money and you are fully right, Sabine, and all the others, before public money comes in, you need to be sure it is sensible investments and private money can follow and take over, and public money goes when a market becomes accepted and liquid for investors as well as those who needs to raise money through markets. But to make that happen, we first of all need to have an alternative to the US dollar, because US dollar is often such a burden and you often take new debt just to pay off your interest. We have to have an interim step, and the euro is a hard currency too, but unlike the Americans, Europe doesn't use it as a weapon. And this is of importance. So please rely on us in Europe. We will follow our currency. We have 25 years of history, and it is one of the strongest we have ever seen on this planet. And it is just an interim step either, because in the end, we have to create local market acceptance. Therefore, it can't go all through loan business. We have to use capital markets for that. And as much as I wish for Europe, as a step as well, we have capital market union, what I mentioned in my opening. We also need capital market acceptance in local market currencies in the developing countries. And this should be our target. And the markets there has to grow, has to provide liquidity. And therefore our banks and other financial institutions are very much needed. That is a contribution we have to do, and we have to walk our talk. Very important. Thank you very much, and thank you all. We are still around for a bit, so please don't be shy. Come to us, go with us in discussions, and we hopefully next year in Belém, in Brazil, can already deliver some results together with our lovely ministry, the BMZ, and also the colleagues from the BMF and all the others, despite the fact we might have a different government by them. But no one of us let you down. All of us are full of passion. I'm very proud to say you are wonderful institutions, but you are more wonderful because of your personalities and your strengths and your passion. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.